Okay, so we were talking about the Himalayas, the fact that they are a massive landform in this area, and they are high enough that they affect the climate and the climatic patterns in this area, especially concerning the monsoon. So, what the heck is a monsoon? Well, this is what the monsoon looks like. In the summer, we have one kind of monsoon, and in the winter, we have another. This is the dominant climate factor in the region, the monsoon, the fact that we have a seasonal shift in winds, because that is what a monsoon is. A monsoon is a distinct seasonal change in wind direction. Okay? Now, quite often, you might hear the word monsoon linked to rain, and people talk about monsoon rains. But the monsoon is not the rain. The monsoon is the change in wind direction. But monsoon gets used a little sloppily, and people talk about it in terms of rain. The monsoon, however, brings the rain. Okay, that change in wind direction brings a change in precipitation. So we have a dry monsoon and we have a wet monsoon because it's the wind that is the important part here. Okay, so a monsoon is a distinct seasonal change of wind direction, and that brings changes in precipitation. Either you get a lot of precipitation during a wet monsoon, or you get very little or no precipitation during a dry monsoon. And this is a dominant factor in this region because this really controls what it is like here. The biggest parts of season here, because we're so close to the equator, really has to do with the wet season and the dry season. So this is what this looks like. This is what the winter monsoon and the summer monsoon looks like. Okay? So we have wind that comes in from the southwest during the summertime. It comes from down here south, closer to the equator. Nice warm wind, and then it blows across the warm water. It picks up a whole lot of moisture, and then it hits the land. Right? And starts to cool down, and it hits the Himalayas, and it starts to go up, and it drops all of that rain. So we get a huge amount of heavy rain. Over here, we have the winter monsoon, and things reverse. Now, instead of the wind coming from the southwest, now the wind is coming from the northeast, and it is flowing over the land, which means it's not picking up any moisture, right? It's very dry. So we have the dry monsoon. Okay, well, what causes this change in wind direction? Why does the monsoon happen? Well, it has to do with the way that wind works and where the low and high pressure areas are. Okay? So, wind is like a liquid. Think of it like a liquid. Say I had a fish tank. Okay, I'm holding a fish tank in my hands, balancing it there, and the fish tank is half full of water. Okay? What happens if I suddenly lift my left hand and tip the fish tank? Where is the water going to go? Well, some of it will probably spill out, but the water is going to flow from that high side that I've tipped up to the low side that's on the right. Right? So it flows. It goes from the high to the low. That's exactly what air does. Air doesn't want to be under pressure. It's a gas. It wants to go towards low pressure. It doesn't want to be under high pressure. Think of it like a college student. Right? College students would much rather have less pressure than more pressure. Wind, just like that. Okay? So in the summertime, the high pressure is down here close to the equator, and the low pressure is up here over the Himalayas. So the wind wants to flow that direction. It wants to flow towards the north, onto land, towards the low pressure zone where it will, relax, right? It's not being pushed by that high pressure. So then the wind blows across the water, picks up a lot of moisture, and ends up over the land where it starts to cool down. It can't hold that moisture, and it drops the rain. That is what causes the summer monsoon. And it brings some serious rain. There are some areas that can get over 30 feet of rain in the course of a summer. And I mean feet. I don't mean inches. Feet. 30 feet of rain. That's a serious amount of rain. Now, what about the winter monsoon? Well, it's the reverse. The high pressure and the low pressure zones switch during the other part of the year. And now the high pressure is up here over the Himalayas, the low pressure is down by the equator, and the wind blows to the south, okay, to the southwest. And so, excuse me. So now the wind is blowing across the land, there's no moisture to pick up, and it brings very dry winds. And so we have that contrast between wet and dry. And the fact that we have this huge contrast is something that in geography we call seasonality. That is a difference between seasons. And there is a big difference here between the wet season and the dry season. Okay, so the monsoon is the dominant climatic pattern of this area. We also have strong seasonality to that climate. There's a big difference, a big contrast between the different seasons. Summer monsoon brings rain and flooding. The winter monsoon is dry. Okay? All right, so there's the dominant climate pattern. But remember the rain shadow effect? In our last region, we were talking about Central Asia. We were talking about the fact that we have steppe and we have desert in this area. Well, now we're on the other side. We are on the other side of these mountains of the Himalayas, which we've now talked about how they form. And yet all of this green, well, we need to talk about that. What is that called? What's the opposite side of the rain shadow effect? So we talked about that, right? The air drops, gets more arid, gets more dry. You get desert and dryness on the non-windy side. On the windy side, that is where we get the precipitation. Okay? And that precipitation is called orographic precipitation. Oro means mountain, graphic produced by. We have precipitation that is being produced by mountains. Okay? So orographic precipitation is precipitation caused by the moist air rising. It cools, and then it drops the precipitation because it can't hold as much moisture. And we talked about before, like a dish rag, right? The clouds get wrung out over here as they lift up, as it cools, drops all the rain, and that is why we get a very wet area on the windy side of mountains, okay? Just like we would see in the western side of the Rockies. All right, and you can see it, right? There it is once again, dry side on the non-windy side, and the side over here is where you get all of that precipitation. Okay, and look, isn't that just beautiful? This is the windy side of the Himalayas, and it's just incredibly lush. There's a huge amount of vegetation in this area. Okay? So we have heavy summer rains because of the monsoons. We have orographic precipitation that really characterizes this area here, especially to the south of the Himalayas. There is rain throughout the entire region, but see where this river is? This is the Ganges River that flows like this. This is the area that especially gets a huge amount of that moisture. And over here in the east, because not only are the winds blowing across the land this way, the wind can also cross the land and then cross the water again, so it picks up more moisture. So it drops a huge amount of moisture in this area. In fact, the areas right in here are some of the very wettest in the entire world. So we've got heavy summer rains because of the wet monsoon. We have orographic precipitation, and that feeds some really big rivers. And we've got the Ganges, we have the Brahmaputra, which swings like this, and then this area in here, this is Bangladesh. It's basically very low lying, and it's one big river valley, one big river plain. But over here, you can see we've got a series of rivers that move to the south. They're moving towards the Bay of Bengal and into these other bodies of water. All of these rivers are fed by those summer rains, by the orographic precipitation. And we also have the Himalayas here. So we have some really rugged valleys. So we've got several large parallel rivers in valleys over there. And that means that this is a very rugged area that's difficult to cross because you've got big rivers and you have pretty rugged valleys and mountains. Okay? So this is a difficult area to travel and rugged. It's also remote. Because of the height of the mountains. Okay, so now that we've talked about all of these pieces of the landform and the fact that we have a lot of moisture for part of the year that feeds a lot of the rivers, let's look at how this then impacts the culture. And we will do that in the next piece of lecture.